Hi, everybody. This is Marlene with Eerie News. Lots of Eerie News to get to, so let's go there. Now, the our first story is from my Substack newsletter. All right, let's dip in there as far as interesting stories, shall we? Anyway, this is titled "In the Unlikeliest Place." On December 31st, 1992, a septic tank company rolled into the property of a home that sat vacant for 2 years. Reynaldo Ramon Pais, who owned it for decades, died in 1990, and his daughter was selling it. The real estate agent advised her to pump the tank in order to make it more attractive to potential buyers since it had not been serviced in at least 20 years, around 1972, or at least that's what they thought. Timothy Scanlon, 19, with Ted's Tanks, found the septic tank lid had once been broken through and then covered with dirt and a piece of glass. This puzzled him as it appeared the tank had not been pumped before. He continued with his work, possibly thinking of plans for New Year's Eve. Then his eyes were drawn to a round object stuck in the waste of 2 decades. It looked like a coconut, and perhaps he never wondered how something of that size ended up there. He adjusted the hose that extended to the truck and started to pump. Then the process hiccuped and he knew there was a clog. He unscrewed the hose from the septic tank opening and saw the obstruction was human bones. But even with unpracticed eyes, he could see they belonged to a child. There were leg bones, pelvic, ribs, jawbone, and a deceptive looking small brown skull. Timothy immediately called his father, the owner of the company, who sped over to look at what his son had found. Among the remains was a child's cowboy hat. I'm sorry, child's cowboy boot. The next call was to the police. The remaining contents of the septic tank were painstakingly screened by the police, and more bones, another boot, a flashlight, and clothing tags were recovered. There was no doubt the child's remains were hidden here, as it was impossible for him to have fallen in. There were some of the police force who were familiar with an address across the street, and a case had gone cold almost 20 years before. It was the disappearance of 3-year-old Matthew Allred. On January 13th, 1993, the death of the boy was ruled a homicide by undetermined means. There was no indication of injuries that could be found on the bones, but the fact the body was hidden so effectively pointed to a murder. DNA tests could not be completed, however, the size of the bones and the little brown boots were testament that this indeed is where Matthew Allred rested for so many years. The boots were something he was known to wear from morning to night. Matthew disappeared a little after 5 p.m. on Sunday, January 27, 1974. By then the sun was setting. His parent thought he was playing in the yard with his older siblings, ages 12, 7, and 5, and it turned out they were mistaken. Somewhere in the gloom of twilight, Matthew walked out of his yard and into oblivion. Scores of volunteers and police searched for him that night and the days to come. They arranged around the scrubs and palmettos, checking ponds and anywhere a small child could have fallen into. 2 days after Matthew's disappearance, there were hints of late information in the local newspapers that led the police department to believe there are some indications of foul play. The FBI joined the search on the chance a child had been abducted. According to the Tampa Times, quote, Sheriff's Lieutenant Arnie Myers said today, which was January 29th, information from area residents and other clues indicated some other than the child just wandering away. This does not mean we believe the child is dead, and in fact, just the opposite. We just believe foul play is indicated. End quote. He didn't clarify what he meant by foul play. On Wednesday, January 30th, the FBI suspended the search into the child's disappearance. Many thought that Matthew had been abducted, especially after a spokesman denied reports that the Hillsborough Sheriff's Department had information the child had been killed. In February 1974, the search was officially over, but police still followed up leads coming in from the southeastern United States. Matthew's parents believed he had been abducted. Virginia Allred said, I believe he's been abducted by somebody that wanted a child to love. Vernon Allred told reporters he doubted his son's abduction was a spur-of-the-moment incident, and that whoever took Matt might possibly be living in the Clare Mell area. His wife agreed and added, perhaps it is a mother's intuition, but I've thought it might be somebody that lives around here. I wish I had the authority to make a house-to-house search. you wonder what people got in the next room. By June 1974, the story had faded from the newspapers. Across the street from the Alreds lived Reynaldo Pais, age 57, who worked as a waiter and lived in the house with his wife Mary. His children were grown and married. Only 4 months before, one of his sons had wed, and sadly in 1971, another 30-year-old son died in a car accident. The Pies were known as nice neighbors who let the kids on the block play on their property and even allowed little Matthew to ride their pony. Matthew's father, Vernon, spoke well of them when interviewed by a local newspaper 4 days after his son went missing. Months and years sped by, and the Allreds held out the hope that one day their son would return, searching for his real family. But time also erased those that could provide answers. If alive and questioned, would Reynaldo Pais tell the story of what happened to Matt Allred on that winter night? Was there an accident? Or more unforgivable, was it an act of cold-blooded murder? His wife Mary died in 1983. Did she have any inkling that a child's body was secreted in the septic tank of her home while she comforted his mother? Unknown to Mrs. Allred, she was pregnant with a son. She gave birth in October 1974. The family moved to Connecticut to escape the horror of those days. However, the pair eventually divorced. Vernon Allred moved back to the area. The home they lived in during those years was razed, and another structure was built there in 2001. On January 6, 1993, Matthew's memorial service was held. Despite answering the most pressing question, which was what happened to Matt Allred, there were others just as important that most likely will remain unresolved. They are why and who. Vernon Allred passed away in 2003. So there you go. Let me tell you, see, and that's sometimes, unfortunately, come on, that's an unusual place for a kid to end up in. So, and anybody that could have been asked are dead. The guy that was living there, Reynaldo, his wife, you know, because let me tell you, and a little kid that comes into your yard, I don't know, makes you want to like be able to resuscitate this guy from the dead and ask him, did you do something to this kid? Which is what it looks like, because let me tell you, it's not that he was, because he could have been killed by anybody, but the fact that they put him inside a septic tank, yep. So, anyway, let's get on to the next story, which is out of Stranger Than Fiction Stories, and it's titled The Cult of the Leopard Men. The cult of Abakwa originated as early as the 1700s in West Africa, particularly in the Ivory Coast, Gabon, Liberia, and Sierra Leone, and Nigeria. It came to the Caribbean, South America, and Cuba with slaves in the early 19th century. Its all-male members are known as ñaños, and it's believed they could transform into leopards through the use of witchcraft to kill their enemies. Certain secret societies spread across the people living in the region from from the southeastern coastal area of Nigeria to northwestern Cameroon, mostly among the Afiks. At first glance, they functioned as a social club. However, they developed a much more sinister reputation. They were known by different names. One of these was the Ekpe Society. Ekpe, according to tradition, is a being from untamed nature that threatens humans and was very much feared. The term Ekpe also means leopard. This belief influenced the checkered pattern of their costumes that mimic leopard spots. Hold on. Alright, let me see. Let's pause this for a bit. Here we go. The cult members also killed in imitation of a leopard by slashing, gashing, and mauling their human prey with steel claws and knives. Part of their ceremonies were drinking the blood and eating the flesh of their human victims. They were known as Anyoto Anyota, and they operated mostly in Sierra Leone, Liberia, and Cote d'Ivoire. It was very easy to provoke an attack. A random illness or failure of crops would demand a human sacrifice. In Old Calabar, they were known as Meforokepe, Ekpe, and they were dreaded. An initiate had to drink a bottle of their victim's blood before the assembled members. An elixir made from their person's intestines was believed to give them superhuman powers and the ability to change into leopards. This drink is called Borfima. The executioner, known as Batiyeli, would wear a ritual leopard mask and a leopard skin robe. He would stalk a victim that had already been chosen. The sacrifice was usually made at their jungle shrine, but it could be done anywhere using a two-pronged steel claw that was part of the executioner's costume. Ekpe was introduced by slaves from the from the Cross River region in Africa, and emerged as the abakwa in Cuba. Induction involves secret ritual ceremonies, and the costume is called ireme. Purposefully, the costume has a mask to give the wearer anonymity. George Banbury's book, Sierra Leone or the White Man's Grave, described the following quote, beyond jurisdiction, sacrifices and slaughter are still carried on. Trials by ordeal of both fire and poison are frequent. Unfaithfulness of wives or concubines affords opportunity for a special medicine man detector, and he will be feasted with plenty today, and dash out the wretched woman's brains on the morrow, under the pretense of discovery of marital sin. Secret cannibalism is also prevalent, though the native punishment for this custom is death. And the Mendi mission, which was an American society, they possessed the skin of a large leopard, with iron claws, which had once been the property of a man who under his guise satisfied his horrible craving. The medicine men themselves are frequently guilty of mysterious crimes, which they afterward charge against innocent victims, so as to retain or increase their reputation as seers. To be a witch, one must have taken human life, or be credited with some supernatural power over the unknown and mysterious. To be a successful medicine man, one must possess quick powers of penetration, decision, and a knowledge of subtle vegetable poisons and their specifics, which enables him to kill one and cure another, while to onlookers both have taken the same poison. The belief of both educated and ignorant in the ability of these medicine folks is unshaken. They are consulted for everything and by everybody. Certain parts of the body of a stillborn child are much sought after for medicines and gree. Graves are desecrated for the purpose of obtaining the bodies of girls of tender age who die under peculiar conditions. Then there is the weird and mystic pora, a sort of barbarous Freemasonry existing among the pagan tribes. The meetings are held at night time, in the bush, the leaves of which are plaited in some mystic way which is detected by the natives, who will never enter inside the mystic ring of bush so guarded. No man will pass within some distance of this, even in the daytime, without whistling or making a noise to notify that he is in the neighborhood. While the poor boys are out at night, hold their meetings, which are generally on moonlit nights, women will not leave their houses at all. The pora sentries encircling the deep shadowed grove will keep up a weird chanting shout to warn all people away. None could pass through these stylers of the society without the sign. To attempt such a thing would be instant death, nor would the murder ever be traced. Any person passing by, even at a distance, must give warning of his approach and obey the unknown voice, commanding him to stop or return. Otherwise, from some low bush, a form would suddenly rise. There would be a dull shadow across the dark ground, and a headless corpse would be secretly buried unknown to the outer world. The origin and design of the secret society has never been traced. It is evidently of great antiquity, and bears a strange resemblance to the weird meetings of the Druids of early British history, whose worship was also carried on among the deep glades of the forest, and also consisted of sacrifices, both human and of other animals and birds on state occasions. To Pora agency, the frequent disappearance of innocent girls must be ascribed. Their bodies are sometimes found afterward with certain parts removed, but the history of these sacrifices can only be imagined, for as a society, among a pagan and superstitious people, its laws and customs are inviolate and untraceable. In it there are different grades of initiation, and those not admitted into the inner ring know nothing of the incantations there carried on. For houses no voices will be heard, and the rites are then conducted by mysterious signs under the worship of the Pora devil, becomes a hideous revelry on which the somber light of the moon casts its fitful shadows. End quote. So in other words, even within Africa society, the regular people, it's like, don't go out tonight. So let's continue. In 1891, a story came from Sierra Leone, West Africa. The Leopard Men left the mutilated body of a man on the roadside. The head had been opened and the brains taken out. The right hand and the left foot was cut off and the heart also taken away. According to the writer, this was the third instance of a murder in the area. Shortly after World War I, there was an outbreak of leopard cult murders in Sierra Leone and Nigeria. Many of the members were captured and executed, forcing the cult to go underground. They continued to perform their ritual murders every year for the next 20 years. In 1923, reports of the Leopard Society in Sierra Leone described where members were armed with a set of iron instruments fastened inside both hands. In 1934, Dr. Werner Jung worked in St. Timothy's Hospital at Cape Mount, Liberia. He was a German surgeon and physician who worked as an Episcopalian missionary from 1930 to 1940 in the area of Sierra Leone. Dr. Jung was confronted many times with activities of both the Crocodile Society and the Leopard Society. Dr. Jung wrote a book, African Jungle Doctor. He described how he was asked by the chief of Toso to give an opinion about the cause of a girl's death. The question was whether she had been mauled by a leopard. Dr. Jung thought it was rather odd when the chief told him that a man may have committed the murder, even though it was reported she had been savaged by an animal. This is a quote from the book. There on a mat in the house, I found the horribly mutilated body of a 15-year-old girl. The neck was torn to ribbons by the teeth and claws of the animal. The intestines were torn out, the pelvis shattered, and one thigh was missing. A part of the thigh gnawed to the bone, and a piece of the shin bone lay near the body. It seemed at first glance that only a beast of prey could have treated the girl's body in this way. But closer investigation brought certain particularities to light which did not fit in with the picture. I observed, for example, that the skin at the edge of the undamaged part of the chest was torn by strangely regular gashes about an inch long. Also, the liver had been removed from the body with a clean cut no beast could make. I was struck too by a piece of intestine, the ends of which appeared to have been smoothly cut off. And lastly, there was a fracture of a thigh, a classic example of fracture by bending. End quote. Dr. Jung observed when two leopards were given a dead monkey to eat. He noticed they did not tear their prey at all like the corpse had been mutilated. This convinced him the girl was murdered by a man and not an animal. He wrote up a report and brought it in person to the mayor, which ended up in the hands of the head of police. The official told him he knew all about that kind of murder. It was the work of a secret society, the so-called Leopard Society, and that there was no protection against the scourge. None of the natives would step outside after dark, and when there was another leopard murder in a distant village, they all breathed again. For now, so they said, there would not be another for a month. Soon the chief from Tasso called for another postmortem. This time it was an 8-year-old boy who was mutilated the same way the 15-year-old girl had been. Dr. Jung then sent both reports to the Minister of the Interior in Monrovia. The reply received was polite but left no doubt that further reports or any interference on my part were not desired. In the interest of my personal safety, I was advised to keep right out of the matter in question. The next victim was an old woman. It was the fifth murder of an 18-year-old married woman, which brought the chiefs of Tasso and Joni to approach the mayor and demand that something be done. The local government dragged its feet. The fact that villagers were fleeing, and then another murder of a retarded man who had slept outside in a hammock, forced the hand of the authorities. Eventually there were confessions and about 30 members of the Leopard Society were arrested. However, the chief of the band remained unknown. The identity of the ringleader was discovered purely by coincidence. A young man who had been trapping in a forest near Joni took shelter in a small shed to escape a thunderstorm. It was full of clutter and rubbish, and he bedded on some boards and mat laid across the beams which supported the sloping roof. He awoke when the door opened, and a man came in with an oil lamp. By the dim light, it was evident he was familiar with the place. The boy saw him open a large chest, take something out and shut it. Inside the chest he saw caps of leopard skin, claws from iron sheathed in leopard skin, spears, oddly shaped knives, and large pincers. The boy did not stir until the man left. The next morning he ran 15 miles from Joni to Cape Mount and told his story to the mayor. Soldiers returned with the boy to the hut and found the owner, which was the old man with the lamp. He was the head of the leopards. Also arrested was Cain, a black missionary. It was he who had brought this ancient and bloodthirsty religious order of the leopards from his native Basaland, south of Monrovia, and revived it in Cape Mount. The master of the leopards possessed a fetish with a medicine that transformed his followers into leopards and exacted blood sacrifice. The fetish was a lump of black wax about the size of a child's head, wrapped in cloths and bits of leopard skin. During the dry season, the protecting wax would dry up and cracks would appear on its surface. This was the medicine call for a sacrificial victim. Blood would be poured on it to give it moisture, especially that taken from the victim's organs. Also, fat taken from the bodies was used to moisturize it. It demanded not merely human blood, but the blood of one of the members of the society on whom the choice of the talisman fell. This member would offer their body by claiming a victim from their own family. Even 2 generations descended from them could be substituted. The reasoning was, if I offer the blood of one of my blood relations, I offer my own, and so the requirement of the god is met. This also explained why the villagers had told Dr. Jung the murders would only occur during the dry season. It turned out the head of the leopard cult was defended by his son, who lived in Cape Mount. His defense was based on the fact that his father was received as a youth into the Society of the Leopards, and by offering his own blood had been joined to the leopard magic, and could never be separated from it, not even when he became a Christian. He was innocent of the murders since they were committed by the other members, who by then had already been executed. The murders were deemed the act of the leopards, since as men they had lost their own will. As men they were innocent, and their guilt as leopards could not be assessed by any human court. The authorities ordered Mr. Kane to leave the district. He retired to his native Basilan, where he died 2 years later. Abe Gunter was a missionary who spent 35 years in Liberia. He was a pilot with a plane which took him to many places in Africa. By the time he left in 1980, he came across the Devil Society, the Alligator Society, and others. He wrote a book, Jungle Pilot in Liberia. In 1947, he was visiting a church near the coast. One day he noticed a brass ring buried in the mud. It weighed 10 pounds, measured 7 inches across, and 1.5 inches thick with 4 knobs. He cleaned it off and took it to a man named Deacon Carr. He asked what the item was. The response was, quote, "Oh yes, I will tell you. My grandfather was the big chief in this village. He was so afraid of spirits, sicknesses, war, and other people's witchcraft that he went to the big witch doctor. With the help of the blacksmith, they poured this beautiful marked brass ring. The witch doctor laid the ring down in the middle of the village. By then the sun was going down, and the witch doctor had a meeting with just the elders of the village and my grandfather. He told them, 'You asked for the most powerful witchcraft, and that always needs a human sacrifice. I want you to bring a young boy at midnight to the new god so that we can make this sacrifice.' An 8-year-old boy with his mouth gagged was brought that night. They cut his throat and spilled all his blood on the brass ring. And from that time on, all the activities of the village revolved around the brass god, sacrifices, worship, and all." End quote. In 1948, police finished a 3-year investigation into the butchering of so many people. They calculated that 196 men, women, and children had been victims of the man-leopard murders, and these were the ones that had been discovered. It was suspected there were many more that never came to light. In the movie Black Panther from 2018, there is a reference to the Leopard Men cult, which shows African men wearing leopard costumes to defend the interests of their society, which is quite misleading since historically many of the victims were innocent Africans who were used for sacrificial purposes and handled as expendable beings with no thought for their suffering. It is from these origins that the Abakwa cult flourished in the New World, especially the island of Cuba. They carried on the same traditions from their homeland of Africa. The Abakwa are known for swearing their members to lifelong secrecy, and if they ever betray what they knew, they would be murdered. They are known to steal and sacrifice children as part of their rituals. Animals are also regularly sacrificed. Notorious in Africa for making regular deals with slavers, they would turn over their victims for profit at the coastal city of Calabar. Made up mostly of merchants, the population was divided into free men and slaves, which made up the majority of the inhabitants of Old Calabar. This area was active for the slave trade from the 1640s until the 1840s. Slaves from this area became known as Caravali, a corruption of the city's name, which was known as Old Calabar. It was situated in the Bight of Biafra, which included a loose confederation of nearby settlements united under the Ekpe secret society. The region was originally named by 15th century Portuguese navigators who referred to the denizens of the Gulf of Guinea coast as Calabar, due to the area being a primary source of the poisonous Calabar bean. The British abolished slavery in the British territories in 1808. The arrival of British missionaries in 1846, particularly from the United Presbyterian Church of Scotland, marked a significant turning point in the region's history. These African-based cults syncretized with the Catholic religion, which prevailed in much of the New World. Abac was a variant of the Santeria religion and worshipped many of the same deities or orishas. Its main ceremonies, known as Las Matanzas, translates from Spanish as the massacre. This is also the name of a Cuban province where it became deeply rooted. Besides allowing only men in its ranks, they reject any black-colored object, including sacrificial animals. Most of the members are initiated as children. Despite being described as a fraternal order, a religion, or even a secret society, Abaqua has a reputation for being dark and evil. Jim Schutz, Texas journalist and author of Cauldron of Blood, The Matamoros Cult Killings, described it as, quote, the darkest of all Afro-Caribbean sects, end quote. They have been accused by santeros of torture, human sacrifice, and ritual cannibalism. According to Michael Newton in his book, Raising Hell, an encyclopedia of devil worship and satanic crime, Detective Jim Bradley with Washington, D.C.'s Metropolitan Police Department said that Abaqua is the most dangerous of Santeria's fringe groups, surpassing even Palo Mayombe in its malignancy. In 1978, a play titled Abaqua was presented in Havana, Cuba, which depicted the covert rituals known only by the members. 14 days later, the cast of 20 actors had been murdered by persons unknown. Most secret societies demand secrecy from their members, but the Abaqua are known to punish disclosure with death. This has made the exact number of members difficult to ascertain. Many followers came to Miami during the 1980 Mariel boat lift. Cuba's penal code explicitly criminalized Abaqua or Nañigos since 1876. The cult is not adverse to identifying as santeros, which are more integrated with Catholicism, or tupaleros, adherents of Palo Monte Mayombe, who are described as the darker side of Santeria to further obfuscate who are the members. Both Santeria and Palo Mayombe camouflage their pantheon with Catholic saints. Santeria followers are thought to practice gray magic, while Palo Mayombe is mostly black magic intent on binding the souls of the dead. To differentiate themselves from any Christian identity, they call themselves as Paleros Judíos, which translates to Jewish Paleros, equating the comparison to Jews who are not baptized by holy water. The Palero's power is centered in a magic cauldron known as Anyanga, where he strives to create a miniature universe of death and corruption where souls are sucked in and trapped, compelled to do the Palero's bidding. Inside it are blood, bones, coins, remains of animals and humans, railroad spikes, poisonous insects, and deer antlers. In putting together the Nakanga, a Palero will seek the key ingredient, which is a fresh corpse known as Kiyumba. Cemeteries are robbed to obtain a head, rib, fingers, tibias, and toes. Eventually, other ingredients are added, such as blood or organs obtained through ritual sacrifice. As in Juju and other Afro-Caribbean cults, death by torture is preferred for sacrificial animals and human beings, so that the spirits are charged up with pain and fear when they reach the other side. 28 sacred sticks are buried in it and used to call forth the captive spirits known as the Kisi, which are fed with blood. A blending of Santeria, Palomayombe, and Abaqua are believed by international authorities to have been practiced by Adolfo Constanzo and his followers. Constanzo was a narco-Satanist who, along with his cult followers, kidnapped med student Mark Kilroy in 1989. Kilroy's body, along with others, was found buried in the shallow graves in Matamoros, Mexico. They all showed signs of torture and being ritualistically sacrificed. However, stories of Abaqua murders predate this event by decades. In 1905, the Evening Star detailed a horrendous crime committed in Cuba. It involved the sacrifice of a child by a brujo named Domingo Bocort, a Lukumi from Africa. He told a woman named Adela that her dementia could be cured by the blood of a white child. Juana, another woman who could not conceive, was told she was cursed and could only be cured by the blood and heart of a white child. He selected two followers, Ruperto Ponce and Victor Molina, to find a child for the cures. In November 1904, they went to the neighboring farm Reserva, located in the village of Gabriel on the outskirts of Huila de Melena. The act was described as the following quote: Molina, one of them, went to cut palms on the Zuniga farm, adjoining that on which lived the three Diaz brothers, each of who had had young children. Having possessed himself of one of these, the little Zoila Diaz, he and the other went to the latter, Bocor's house, and there butchered the child, taking out her heart and collecting her blood in a glass jar, after which the corpse was preserved, probably by first salting and then smoking it. The blood and hearts were administered to the patients without any perceptible effect on Adela, while it is too early for Juana's faith in their efficacy to be confirmed or shaken. End quote. The child was only 20 months old and taken from the backyard of her home. The family could not understand how their young daughter could disappear so suddenly, since she would be unable to walk a long distance. A search by the authorities and neighbors only produced a camisole with bloodstains. Initially, there was a belief it was a kidnapping, but no request for ransom was sent to the parents. There were no clues as to what happened to the child. A detective, Mr. Jose Valdez, lived in the village of Vereda Nueva. He had recently lost his own daughter about the same age to sickness. He read of the disappearance of the child in the newspapers and asked the local authorities to be assigned over the case. Upon his arrival in the village of Gabriel, he started to read the people who lived there. He had worked other cases of kidnapping, and normally an act where a child was taken would be spoken of by everyone. However, he observed that no one made mention of the kidnapping, not on the streets, the taverns, or anywhere. He considered this his first clue. After this, he went to see the governor over the municipality and explained that he believed what happened to Zoila was the work of individuals who lived in the area. This was a person the local populace were afraid of. Diaz also noted many men that seemed unemployed and which were Nañigos. The governor refused to believe that members of the cult existed in his jurisdiction. However, he had heard a number of Negros Brujos resided there. Detective Valdez, in the guise of a worried father, approached the witches saying that his young daughter was sick and that he would do anything in order to save her. Previous to this, he had inquired from the parents what jewelry Zoila had been wearing when she disappeared. She had a necklace made of jet and small gold earrings with pieces of coral and a bracelet made of coral. Valdez arrived at the home of the head witch and spoke to a man named Julian Amaro. He told him his young daughter had sickened and a Congolese woman had helped to make her better, but she had sickened again. On her third visit, the woman had instructed him to come to this village because she knew of a young girl named Zoila which had disappeared. If the head witch would give him the necklace Zoila was wearing, once he placed it on his daughter, she would be cured. Detective Valdez described the necklace was made of 10 pieces of jet and 15 corals. He offered Amaro 20 centenes for the necklace. Julian told him he had to speak to someone above him named Jorge Cardenas, and they agreed to meet later in the day at a tavern. When Valdez met with Cardenas later in the day, he kept up the pretense of the distraught father. He became convinced there was a group of men involved in the crime after Cardenas told him he would bring the necklace he had described. However, the days passed and Cardenas did not come forward with the jewelry. The detective then received permission to bring Cardenas in for questioning, but the man did not admit to anything. However, suspicion deepened when he denied meeting with Julian Amaro in the prior days, when it was known they had. While Cardenas was being held on a minor charge, his house was placed under surveillance. They saw a young woman named Micaela Romero leave with a bulky package. Police questioned her as to what she carried and where she was taking it. She initially tried to deny everything and then said it was only clothes that had to be ironed. The police went to the house where she had left it. The owner said that Micaela had arrived with what she said was clothes that had to be ironed and had left the package in one of the rooms. They took Micaela to the house and asked her to retrieve it. Inside, they found a newspaper with a human skull. There was also a tibia and other things. Both women with the contents of the package were taken to the police station. Inside were different colored powders, roots, horns, colored glass, and other objects used in witchcraft. From the arrest of Jorge Cardenas and Julian Amaro, they obtained the name of Domingo Bocor, known as El Brujo de San Cristobal, which translates to the Witch of St. Christopher. The search for the girl had become so intense that the murderers were forced to throw the body in a thicket equally distant from the house of the perpetrator where it was found. In January 1906, Domingo Bocor and Victor Molina were garroted in prison by the executioner Patricio Lopez Aveleira. He was an accused murderer who agreed to execute prisoners in order to reduce his sentence. For each execution, he would receive an ounce of Spanish gold. Bocor told him before his death, Prepárate que vas a trabajar, which translates to prepare yourself, you are about to work. The executioner responded, I don't wish to, but if there is one occasion I will do my work with satisfaction, it will be now, since I will execute the author of one of the most horrendous crimes I have known of. A dozen other men and women were arrested in connection with the crime, and eventually 6 of them were convicted. In 1976, Roberto Suro with the Chicago Sun-Times wrote of a visit to Cuba. He learned that Cubans in those years believed the CIA succeeded in poisoning Fidel Castro and that he was saved by a, quote, black doctor who recited a chant that drew the poison out of Fidel and into his own body, end quote. The doctor died exchanging his life for a comandante. Suro toured the museum of Guanabacoa where a guide told him of 3 sects that were active in Cuba, based on beliefs the slaves brought from Africa. The guide described that the Bakwa banged drums to recreate the voice of God. Each member of the sect was tasked to make a drum from a human skull that would be used at his funeral. As to how they acquired the skull, Suro was told that no one is really certain. Each of the Abakwa rituals is punctuated by the slaughter of a goat that is first caressed and kissed for several hours to make it human. They are forbidden to speak of these things to non-believers. That is why human sacrifice among these cults refer to the victim as a goat without horns. The guide spoke of brujos, also called paleros, which have the most primitive beliefs. He asked the guide if these cults had adapted to communism. Her answer was that Fidel Castro felt a certain debt to them because many Abakwa and Santeros fought with him to overthrow the government and take over Cuba. Suro asked an anthropology student at Havana University about how many people belonged to these cults, and he was told that there were 50,000 people waiting to join the Abakwa, and the sects had many hundreds of thousands between them. He concluded that Castro had not ended voodoo worship, despite communists adhere to atheism and deny the existence of any deity. In pre-Castro years, 90% of all Cubans were practicing Catholicism. In the late 1980s, Cuban artist Belkis Ayllón was inspired by the Abakwa sect. Mostly it was based on the story of the Princess Sican, the only woman in Abakwa lore who was put to death for revealing the religion's secrets to her fiancé. Towards the end of her life, she produced Let Me Out, in which a woman appears to be trapped by fire. It's like a painting. Sican's result in the face of death is here replaced by claustrophobic fear and anguish. Ayllón's interpretation is of the artist who identified with the sacrificed princess. Ayllón committed suicide in 1999 at the age of 32. Versions of this dark practice can be found in other countries and not only the Caribbean. In 1979, as many as 5 children were believed to have been sacrificed in a candomblé and macumba rite in Cantagalo, Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. An investigation started after Antonio Carlos Magajes, a 2-year-old, disappeared. His aunt worked on a farm owned by Moacir Valente. She told police that Valente, along with an employee, Renato Anecio Ferreira, had sacrificed a child in a black magic ritual. According to the aunt, Valente's spiritual advisor, a brujo named Ogier, told him to offer the blood of a goat, a black chicken, and an innocent child to ensure a cement plant he planned to open would be successful. Up to then, Valente had tried to find European investors, but without success. This is when he decided to seek help from Ogier. Police found the boy's body decapitated and cut in half. His blood had been poured into a plastic bag. His corpse was placed in 2 other bags and was found behind a clump of trees. It was believed Valente had drunk the child's blood as part of the ritual. After this discovery, both men were arrested. 2 other employees, Waldir de Sousa Lima and Maria de Conciao Pontes, were accused of helping the wealthy farm owner. Lima and Pontes told police as many as 4 other child victims who had been sacrificed were buried at Valente's farm. Antonio Carlos Magajes had been the last one. A mob of 2,000 residents surrounded the police station, demanding immediate justice. They set fire to 4 police cars and then stormed the jail. 7 policemen fled before the fury of the townspeople. The crowd kicked the 2 prisoners and then threw them into a burning car where they perished. Police protection was ordered for the other two suspects. The authorities continued to search the farm for bodies of four other children reported missing. However, it's unknown if they ever found anything. No doubt if the authorities did find the other children, they might have thought it prudent to keep it from the townspeople after what happened to the murderers. Valente's spiritual advisor Ogier was said to have turned himself into the police. Many believed out of fear of retribution from other practitioners of candomblé for bringing scandal to their religion. Candomblé and macumba are African-based beliefs like Abakba. So there you go. Secretive, cultish, deadly, wherever they are. Bad combination. And yes, if anybody's thinking, yes, they do still exist in modern times, but that's where they were saying they operate very much, low profile, things of that nature. Okay, next story. Also, stranger than fiction stories is Unclaimed, Unsolved. Since 1999, a trail of disappearances and the discovery of human remains littered small towns in the South. Was it sheer coincidence or the work of one killer? On July 22, 2007, partial skeletal remains were found wrapped in a 6 by 8 foot green tarp tied with 72 feet of rope. The remains were buried on private property about 40 feet from the Coosa River at 308 Gladys Road, Titus, Alabama. This was only 40 feet from the Coosa River. The remains were discovered when the property owners were gardening. They seldom visited the location since 1991. Lime seemed to have been used around the burial site to stifle the smell of putrefaction. Her estimated date of death ranged from 1950 to 2007. Elmore County Jane Doe was probably 30 to 40 years of age and was black or biracial. She was 5 feet tall and had long dark brown hair. Fingerprints are not available, but dental and DNA evidence is available. There was no clothing, jewelry, or other personal items available to identify her. She suffered several broken bones in a period of time before her death. 2 months later, on September 29, 2007, a skull and upper jawbone were found on the roadside at 683 Old Ottagaville Road, in Prattville, Alabama, by inmates picking up litter. The area had historical significance with nearby sites such as the Lassiter Home Place and Autaga Place, listed on the National Register of Historic Places. The skull had a small medallion with a pentacle glued to it. Little is known about who the skull belonged to except that she was a black female with an estimated age of 40 to 60 years of age. She could have died between 1950 to 2007. No dental or fingerprints are available, but DNA is. She was dubbed Autaga County Jane Doe. Was a pentacle glued to the skull as part of occult practices, or was this just something that a person with a goth flair for decorating discarded? In some black magic practice, keeping the remains, whether a victim or dug up from a cemetery, is a way to bind the soul for divination services or as a messenger. In 2019, a Reddit poster related the following, quote, in early 2006, grave robbing was happening not far from where the skull was found. Just a little tidbit, albeit unlikely related to these cases, end quote. Or it might be. Another cold case tied to the same area is the disappearance of Shannon Nicole Polk, age 11, who was last seen in the Candlestick RV Park where she lived with her mother and sister. Maria Polk left for work at 7 a.m. and left Shannon in the care of her older sister, who was 16 years old. When she got home, her daughter was not there. By 7 p.m., the family became concerned, and residents of the RV park began looking for her. Police contacted Shannon's father, Billy Joe Polk, who lived in Eufaula, who confirmed she was not there. She was reportedly playing outside and visiting neighbors that day, including a friend on Met Street and a neighbor who was a Prattville police officer, before being seen near the pond and the Halloween Man's house. The Halloween Man is a nickname given to a neighbor in the Candlestick Park mobile home park. He earned this nickname due to his elaborate Halloween decorations and the fact that he gave out candy to neighborhood children. On the day Shannon went missing, a witness named Miss Mary saw Shannon knock on the Halloween Man's door, but he did not answer, leading Miss Mary to believe he was not at home. This sighting is one of the last confirmed observations of Shannon before her disappearance. Halloween Man's true identity has never been disclosed by police. Shannon was believed to have been kidnapped between noon and 1:15 p.m. after leaving the officer's house without the baby walker she had been carrying, which was later found on the curb near the Halloween Man's house. The walker had been cleaned by a pregnant neighbor who found it, destroying any potential evidence. Federal, state, and local authorities conducted an intense search for her without any luck. In September 2001, a 3-minute segment was aired on America's Most Wanted. They also aired a composite of the man the police were looking for as a witness. Someone had placed the man talking to Shannon the day she disappeared. He was described as a white man, about 6 feet tall, stocky, muscular build, very tanned, with a beer belly. He was estimated to be 35 to 45 years old. His arms were hairy and his teeth yellow and crooked. He had pronounced creases around his eyes and mouth and across his brow. A bump on the bridge of his nose indicated it had once been broken. It was once broken. He had a prominent mole under his right eye, with hairs growing out of it towards his nose. At that time, the man wore his dark hair short, and he had a mustache and goatee. He was driving a white 4-door car that was covered in red dirt. He may have been inside Candlestick Park before Shannon's abduction and had access to different vehicles. It was not until 2018 that this whole scenario, including the sketch rendered, was found to be totally false and manufactured by the witness. Now think about it. This person, this witness, gave this very good description of somebody, and it turned out to be false, which of course led police astray looking for this person. Incredible. At the beginning of October 2001, the search ended. Rabbit hunters in a wooded area in the Autaga Wildlife Management Area, approximately 15 miles north of Prattville, found the body, which was later identified via DNA as Shannon Polk. According to Margaret Faulkner, an FBI agent assigned to the case, they were looking for a suspect who was familiar with the mobile home park where Shannon lived and the area where the body was found. A sergeant with the Prattville Police Department said the suspect may have changed his personal appearance by growing or removing facial hair or changing his hair color. He asked people in the area to look for someone who recently cleaned his car more than he would be normal. Despite all the effort by law enforcement and the community, the case went cold. Several individuals were considered persons of interest over the years. Jack Earl Gibson, known as the Root Beer Man, earned his moniker since he gave children root beer and candy in exchange for performing odd jobs around his home, a practice that many in the community found unsettling. He lived just 2 blocks from Shannon's home and was known to pay her to clean his house. He lived across the street from the Halloween Man and was arrested the same night Shannon disappeared for possessing over 1,000 explicit images of children, though none were of Shannon. Ty Foster, another neighbor, was arrested in 2003 on unrelated sexual abuse charges and was later found to have a history of child-related offenses, including possession of child pornography and assault on a minor. He pled guilty to assault and sodomy charges involving a 9-year-old boy in a Baldwin County courtroom, with a trial moved from Prattville due to the high-profile nature of the Polk case. Despite being a person of interest and having a history of criminal activity involving children, Foster was never formally charged in connection with Shannon Polk's murder. Traces of Shannon's blood were found in his home, which he attributed to a nosebleed she had experienced there. Her family confirmed this was accurate. Investigators have explored potential connections to other similar cases, such as the disappearance of 11-year-old Heaven Lachey Ross, who was reported missing on August 19, 2003, in Northport, Alabama. It was just 2 years after the abduction and murder of Shannon Polk. Despite massive community searches with hundreds of volunteers, Heaven's body was not found until December 18, 2006, in an abandoned house 8 miles from her home. This led police to believe her killer was someone from the community. They have never revealed how they believe Heaven was killed. 2 years before Shannon Polk was kidnapped, 11-year-old Teresa Dean was walking to a friend's house in her mobile home park in Twiggs County, Georgia, on the evening of August 15, 1999. She vanished. The police department tried to determine if Heaven's murder was connected to Shannon Polk's case and the disappearance of Teresa Melissa Dean. All 3 girls disappeared in August. They were 11 years old. All 3 lived in trailer parks. In all 3 cases, commercial construction, roadwork, or bridge building was being done nearby. When Teresa Dean was last seen in 1999, she was walking down Lawrence Street near her family trailer at about 8 p.m. on the way to a friend's house to see some puppies. She was wearing a gold and white striped shirt, orange knit pants, clear gel sandals, and gold ball earrings. She had a speech impediment. Cody Dwayne Landers, Teresa's mother's live-in boyfriend at that time, failed a polygraph test which he took voluntarily shortly after Teresa disappeared. He said it had been improperly administered. The relationship between him and Teresa's mother ended. In October 2001, he was convicted on 7 child molestation charges involving 2 children and sent to prison. He has been released and lives in a southern state. He is registered in a national database as an adult Tier 3 sex offender. Teresa's body has never been found, and authorities believe she was a victim of foul play. Teresa's 14-year-old sister Charity was put into foster care after her disappearance. There must have been some type of risk at the home for her to be removed from her mother's care. A Reddit poster commented, quote, "And the fact that someone else called the police because they thought the family wasn't searching properly is heartbreaking. A throwaway child." End quote. 3 months before Heaven Lachey Ross went missing, 13-year-old Tabitha Tudors was last seen walking to her school bus stop on the morning of April 29, 2003 in Nashville. Martin Tim Boyd, arrested 4 months after Tabitha's disappearance for attempting to lure an 11-year-old girl into his car near her home, was investigated but never linked to her case. Neither Teresa Melissa Dean nor Tabitha Tudors have ever been found. Authorities do not currently believe these cases are linked, despite the similarity between the victims and the setting they were taken from. All of these cases remain unsolved, and in some instances the victims are unnamed. So, here you have the remains of what sounds like full-grown women. Okay, a skeleton, a skull. And then you have these girls being abducted. And you say, well, sometimes they're in different states, but they're spaced. And they have something common, which is what they look like, their age, and what was going on around them. And unfortunately, maybe even where they lived. That there was people that were dangerous to children. So yeah, all these cases remain open, and I think the worst had to be, and I don't understand. I didn't why that person gave such a detailed but false description of this person that was seen with poke. Why would you do that? That must have led. Remember, this was not disclosed till how many years? Till 2018. Yeah, it's like, man, is it clear your boyfriend or what? All right. Next one out of Stranger Than Fiction stories is called The Cursed Coastline. The Devil's Slide is an infamous section of Highway 1 which is 2 miles south of Pacifica, and it's been eroding since it was opened in 1936. The Devil's Slide is a steep 900-foot cliff consisting of shale and sandstone with a soft sedimentary layer. This makes the rock very prone to erosion. It's a scenic but dangerous spot, and events of high strangeness are called to it like a moth to flame. In 1973, serial killer Edmund Kemper threw the heads of 2 of his victims in the ocean from that spot. 7 years later, a large chunk dropped 300 feet into the Pacific Ocean. The roadway had to be closed for several weeks to allow for repairs. In 1986, James Lund, 36, decided to take his life by driving his pickup over the side. Stories like these were common every year, in addition to unusual accidents that occurred in this stretch of the California coastline. In September 1950, Harry E. Bates, age 46, from Oakland, a mechanic, was driving along the highway with his wife and friend. He stopped at the Devil's Slide to admire the view. He started to climb to a spot below the highway when he lost his footing, fell, and died. Unfortunately, this was not an uncommon occurrence. In the late 1980s, Dan Moss was driving north along the road when a deer bolted in front of his vehicle. A twist of the steering wheel plunged the car over the edge. Luckily, he dropped to only 50 feet of a 200-foot cliff. Below churned the ocean waves. He climbed up the rock face. His vehicle was beyond any help, though. He had 2 broken ribs and a gash on his head. In 2017, his 22-year-old son Richard drove through the same stretch. A traffic camera inside a nearby tunnel captured his Hyundai going through the tunnel. But this was the last seen of him. The mystery of his disappearance was solved a year later when a cervical vertebrae was found at the Montara State Beach. It belonged to Richard Moss. Parts of his car were in the ocean near the area where he was last seen driving. A DNA match confirmed his identity. But there's more than tragedies at the Devil's Slide that have produced strange stories. In 1979, Pat Hart bought an old two-story house that had once belonged to George E. Dunn, known as a coastside pioneer. She moved it from 785 Main Street to 408 Grove Street, Half Moon Bay. She had bought an old cottage already on the property about 8 years before. It measured only 14 feet by 20 feet and was supposedly built around 1880 on a stand of cypress trees. It had no running water or electricity. It's unknown if she named the small structure Gull House or if that was its name already. She moved it to the rear of the lot to make space for the Dunn house where she planned to live. Throughout the years, she had noticed strange manifestations around the cottage during harvest time. While gardening outside, she would hear footsteps or knocking inside when there was no one there. Items would disappear and then turn up. The door would slam shut and open by itself, even on windless days, as well as locking and unlocking mysteriously. Occasionally, a misty face would materialize in a corner and then dissolve. Shelton described an incident of automatic writing where her pen was taken over by an unseen hand. Hart also described an incident of automatic writing where her pen was taken over again by an unseen hand. Prior to moving to the Dunn house to the site, she tried to sell the cottage when she realized the cost of renovating it. She allowed a buyer to tour the house, which is when the ghost made its presence known outside of its regular timeline. The potential buyer made the casual remark that he'd probably tear it down, referring to a 6-foot long redwood shelf. The words had just left his mouth when the shelf dislodged, sailed through space, and hit him on the head. That marked the end of the tour. I'll say. All right. Patricia Hart said that after owning it for 3 years, the older woman, an older woman confronted her and said, quote, "You know, I was the one who found the body when I was a child back around 1910." End quote. She went on to describe that one day she was sent on an errand to buy eggs from a recluse named Peter Tronson. She was the one who found his decomposing body, which had been there about 2 weeks. The old lady told her that Tronson's body had been found in the corner where the shelf had fallen, and where the footsteps were heard most frequently. Then in the fall of 1980, the feeling inside the cottage became hostile. An icy chill was accompanied by the smell of leather. She, as in Hart, asked Lynn Davis, a trance medium, to come to the cottage and find out why the haunted had changed. Davis claimed to make contact with the departed soul through her spirit guide, Anna. The supposed spirit of Peter Tronson communicated to the psychic that he manifested during the autumn because of the energy coming from children during the pumpkin festival. He gave advice on decorating the house and assured Pat he would never harm her. By 1982, the house had changed hands and the new owners lived there and established a therapy office on the premises. They used the little house as a storage space. It remained tucked away behind the garage of the old Dunn house that shares the same lot. One has to wonder how much truth there was in Pat Hart's story. There is no reference, dead or alive, of Peter Tronson at Half Moon Bay or close by, not even in the cemetery. Also, the story of a man being found dead in his cottage, even a recluse would have made the newspapers, and there is no mention of this event. The description of Peter's ghost becoming active only during harvest time due to children being around is pretty far-fetched, for what was described as a foreign-born man who didn't mix with his neighbors and only sold milk and eggs produced by his animals. One cannot imagine a crusty bachelor coming back and giving hints on decorating his one-time home either. However, research finds that Peter Tronson, different spelling, did exist, but during those years he lived in Grass City, California, and around 1903 he worked for the Union Blue Gravel Mine in Bloomfield. He was kind of an unusual character, and that same year he was arrested for a complaint of disturbing the peace. The incident occurred when he went to the stage office for his baggage, which had been unloaded from the Bloomfield stage. He was in a hurry to catch the car going to Grass City and asked to have his bags brought out. Mr. Crawford, who worked at the station, asked him for a hand with a heavy piece. Tronson said he would only pay $1 since he had help taking his own luggage down, for which he charged 50 cents. charged, Crawford threatened to keep his luggage. Trunson then cocked the hammer of a shotgun he was holding in his hands, commanding Crawford not to touch the articles. A bystander stepped in and further trouble was avoided. Crawford summoned the marshal who arrested Trunson. When the sheriff examined the shotgun, it was not loaded, which is why he was only charged with disturbing the peace. The charge was dismissed. In 1909, Peter Tronson's small cottage that was located several miles below Grass City burned down. He had friends living there. A couple of months later, he took a 30-foot fall from a pine tree while gathering sugar pine cones on Banner Mountain. He was taken to Jones Memorial Hospital, where it was found he had a badly wrenched back, but no broken bones. It wasn't until 1924 that Trounson was heard from again. He was referred to as a ranch owner who had moved to Half Moon Bay. He lived in the area of 119 Arleta Park. He was planning to visit England and New Zealand during that year. Peter Trounson was born December 1854 in England. He immigrated to the United States in 1880, and he died December 19, 1936 in San Mateo, California. He was about 81 years old. There is no mention of a suicide connected to his death. And this was years after the anonymous old lady said she found a dead body. So who was haunting Gold Cottage and Patricia Hart? That being said, it doesn't mean the place was not haunted. It had been occupied for many years before Pat Hart moved in, even though a neighbor described where the little house had stood empty for many years before being bought. That a lonely soul stayed behind, someone who once had this windswept cottage to keep out inclement weather, or where they dwelt as the years went by, is very possible. The cottage still stands and keeps its secrets. Not far from the Devil's Slide, there was another place, owned by the Neal family, which had settled in the area since the 1870s. Built amid a 200-acre spread, it was known as the Neal House. The last family member, Mary Maud Neal, died in 1954. The pilot episode for the series, The Ghost and Mrs. Muir, which ran from 1968 to 1970, was filmed at the Neal House. Its tie to the title of Gold Cottage was only the name used in R.A. Dick's original story, The Ghost and Mrs. Muir. The property is located in Santa Barbara inland, about a quarter mile. The on-screen illusions of it being a coastal property in Maine was created with clever camera work. By 1988, the Neal House was being sold and described as needing a facelift. Since then, it was renovated and went on the market for several $1,000,000. The real Seagull Cottage was originally built in 1906 on a headland overlooking the sea in an area known as Portuguese Bend by a family of shipwrights. Later, it was owned by the Vale family, who were wealthy bankers. It was close to the ocean on Channel Drive. Different members of the family lived there seasonally, but it was owned by Hugh Vale. He married Clara Beale in 1902 and they divorced in 1918. They had 3 children who were adults when in 1924 he was found seated in a chair in front of the stove, dead after inhaling gas. Hugh Vale's parents were related and sprang from the Vale family, which were Quakers originating in New Jersey. Some newspapers inferred he committed suicide due to a problem with alcohol and financial failure. They claimed he left letters addressed to relatives, friends, and business acquaintances. However, none contained any statement why he wished to end his life. This was not entirely accurate, since he did leave a note that read, quote, "My friend was all in all to me. Since death robbed me of my friend, I have simply existed and cannot hope to come back. So what's the use? No one cares now, and I'm no good to anyone." End quote. The mystery was that none of his family or his intimates knew who this mystery friend was that he mourned so profoundly, and had supposedly died a few months before Hugh Vale took his life. The only person who had recently died was a maternal uncle, Benjamin Vale. Hugh had taken a leave at the Fugazi Bank where he worked to travel to New Jersey and attend a funeral. He never returned to his job. His uncle had served as a judge in Elizabeth, New Jersey, and had never married or had children. By the time of Hugh's death, his younger brother, Edward F.R. Vale, left with his family to Italy and did not return to Santa Barbara until 1941. Hugh Vale was said to haunt the property. Not far from the Devil's Slide is another site said to be haunted. The place is the Moss Beach Distillery, 20 miles south of San Francisco. The phantom is the Blue Lady, named thus for the blue dress she's always seen wearing. She is like a banshee. Her appearance comes as a warning of injury, tragedy, or accident. The restaurant, Frank's Place, was built in 1928 by Frank Torres, a Peruvian immigrant. Next door, he built the Marine View Hotel, which burned down in 1953. Up to then, he had run the Marine View Tavern, a speakeasy located close by. There were rumors that a bordello operated from a building next door, and businessmen would take their mistresses over to the hotel after eating dinner in the secluded restaurant. The coastline next to the restaurant was a favorite spot for bootleggers during the 1930s. The liquor came from Canada to be transported over the Devil's Slide to San Francisco. Under the cover of fog, the Canadian rum runners unloaded ships and hauled their cargo up the cliffs. No doubt this is why it became a favorite speakeasy for silent film stars, politicians, and even Dashiell Hammett, who visited and used it as a setting for one of his stories. Murders and shootouts came with the business of rum running near Devil's Slide. It was during those years that the Blue Lady is said to have been killed on the beach below the distillery. No one knows her name, and there were no police records about her murder. It was said she was the wife of a jealous bartender who caught her being unfaithful with a piano player named Charlie. He found the pair walking on the beach, which is when he killed his wife and left his rival injured. There's another version of the tragic episode, and this when the Blue Lady dies in a car accident. Another story is where the piano player had another lover, and the Blue Lady committed suicide by jumping from the cliffs into the ocean. Prohibition ended in 1933, and so did the illegal activity, but the Blue Lady stayed behind. Frank Torres continued to run the business as a restaurant, which later became known as the Moss Beach Distillery. His son Vic continued as owner until 1964 when he died of a heart attack. Mike Murphy bought it and changed the name to the Galloway Bay Inn. The next owners were Dave and Patricia Andrews, who changed the name to the Moss Beach Distillery. They kept it for 8 years. Dave claimed to hear chairs moving upstairs when the restaurant was empty. Faucets would turn on by themselves, and he said the Blue Lady had even locked him out of his office on more than one occasion. In 1981, Mike and Shirley Sarno, the new owners, told the story of the Blue Lady to a reporter from the San Francisco Examiner, and the ghost story took wings. Waitresses claimed they would hear the ghost call their name in a monotone voice. However, there would never be anyone there. In 1992, Sylvia Brown, the TV psychic, visited the restaurant. She gave the ghostly lady a name. It was Mary Morley. In April, she held a seance. 3 ghosts were identified. One was the unfortunate Mary Morley, a married woman, her lover John Cantina, and Anna, who was a second woman Cantina was involved with. According to Brown, Anna threw herself from the cliff, and Mary died from injuries received to her head and the upper body. Even though Cantina died when he was older, they all returned after death to haunt the place they would meet at during their life. Research found that Mary Morley did exist and died in a car accident in November 1919. However, the crash happened on the San Bruno Road after she drove off the road when she encountered a fog bank. Her husband Fred was traveling with her. He was hurt but survived. This place is not close to the Moss Distillery, and this predated the existence of the speakeasy. Census records do not find a John Cantina or Anna Philbrook living in this area during the years that would correspond to Brown's story. A fourth ghost that Brown encountered was Hannah Elder, a lady from the late 19th century with an unknown tie to the area. Some believe that Sylvia Brown, who had known of her visit to the distillery a year before, had a staffer do a little research. They came across the story of Mary Morley's death on a San Mateo County highway and assumed it was close to the restaurant. With this information in hand, they tied her to the mysterious Blue Lady. In 2008, the show Ghost Hunters investigated the Moss Beach Distillery and found several pranks implemented throughout the building, including a mirror with a ghostly reflection and a sensor-triggered speaker that laughed. Darren Coleman, a former Disney employee, in a 2018 interview with the Fresno Bee, said he installed a hydraulic lever that causes chandeliers to sway and a phone to ring by itself. You would think this would cast some doubts about the Blue Lady, except there's a tantalizing clue that appeared in Dashiell Hammett's story, The Girl with the Silver Eyes, released in 1937. The setting is a roadhouse south of San Francisco at Half Moon Bay during Prohibition, where his private eye hero finds trouble and a beautiful femme fatale named Elvira, the silver-eyed girl referenced in the title. Her real name is Jean Delano, a gangster mole, which is ultimately turned over to the law. One has to wonder if the description of his lady villain, like the setting of the story, is based on a real woman. Quote, this is a passage from the story. I had seen the girl before. She was a slender girl in a glistening blue gown that exhibited a generous spread of front, back, and arms that were worth showing. She had a mass of dark brown hair above an oval face of the color that pink ought to be. Her eyes were wide set and of a gray shed that wasn't altogether unlike the shadow's unpolished silver that the poet had compared them to. End quote. In November 1928, residents of Moss Beach were questioned concerning what was suspected to be a murder ring that was responsible for the deaths of at least 3 persons during 4 years. All were found at Pillar Point. The last body belonged to Harold L., aka Harry Peterson, age 39, a San Francisco waiter who was killed by blows on the back of the head, according to the Half Moon Bay coroner. He was found at the bottom of a dry reservoir, his personal effects scattered around him. After the removal of Peterson's body, a 3-foot length of heavy blood-stained rope was found near the reservoir. Strangely, the rope was not there when the body was found or on the following day. 4 men living in a house at Moss Beach, where Peterson was last seen alive on September 23rd, were questioned. They told authorities they had been making beer. Fred Barons and Jack Cases said Peterson was in poor health physically and mentally, and had been drinking heavily. Up to 3 weeks before his death, he had worked at 2251 Market Street in San Francisco, which was a business owned by Barons. Mr. Barons would follow his friend to the grave 2 years later in 1930, when he was 37 years old. The cause of death was not specified in his obit. Within the next few years, the body of a cook and a blacksmith, both former residents of Moss Beach, were found near where Peterson's body was dumped. Both men were killed by skull fractures identical to what caused Peterson's death. Despite promises from the local sheriff that clues were being followed to bring the culprits to justice, none of the murders were ever solved. No doubt that stretch of coastline holds many secrets, including a long-forgotten story of an unlucky lady that wore a blue dress when she met her end. So yeah, there's like true things, made up things, but then again, when people are doing illicit things like rum running or, you know, things happen, people get killed, people disappear, and nobody's there to point the finger or even find them. So yeah, I'm sure there's people there that disappeared that they didn't even know what happened to them. Okay, this next story is out of Daily Mail and is titled Colorado Woman's Body is Found Feet from Her Home 7 years After She Disappeared. It makes you wonder, how hard did they try to find this poor lady? But anyway, the body of a Colorado woman who had been missing for 7 years was found just feet from her body by a man clearing junk out of a garage. On September 10th, as in this past September 10th, the man found the bone he thought might have been a Halloween decoration, since fake skeletons were set up around the property at that time. He called authorities after he and a neighbor determined the bones were real. In late October, police identified the remains in Lac Bulle, or Lac Butte, or Lac Butte, a town northeast of Denver, as belonging to Terry Ann Ackerman. No cause of death has been released. Terry, 56, was reported missing from her small ranch-style home in August 2018 by her husband, Delbert Ackerman. After her disappearance, Lac Butte police and multiple other agencies extensively searched the home and the surrounding area with dogs and drones. Authorities also interviewed numerous people and reviewed surveillance footage to no avail. Dale Ackerman, who has since died, had said that Terry was sleeping in their bedroom when he left for work at 5 a.m. on Thursday, August 23rd. This was the last time he saw her, he maintained. On that Thursday, Terry paid a visit to her daughter, Ambry Carolus, to her daughter, Ambry Carolus. Carolus said her mother was acting normal, but also described her as down on herself. Around 4:30 p.m., Terry left her daughter's home, only to call her 3 hours later upset and crying. She told Carolus that she could not watch her grandchildren the next day. Carolus said Terry took medication for her bipolar disorder, and those pills were missing from the house after she disappeared. Carolus added that her mother's condition was manageable and that she didn't believe it could have contributed to what happened to her. The next day, on Friday, Dale showed up at Carolus' door early in the morning to watch the kids, but Carolus' husband had already taken off work to watch them. Dale then went home and reported Terry missing to the police that afternoon. The family has pointed out allegedly strange behavior from Dale on the day of the disappearance, and said that Lochbuie police failed to effectively lead the investigation. Dale was never charged with Terry's death, and Sean Ackerman, Dale's stepson, believes his father could never have killed his stepmother. The chain of events that led to Terry's remains being found was triggered by Dale's death in February 2025 at age 70. Sean inherited the Lochbuie property Dale and Terry once lived in together, but he decided that it was in such poor condition that he would sell it. A contact who offered to take scrap metal and other junk away from the home opened up the garage on September 10th and made the gruesome discovery. The garage was reportedly stuffed with boxes from floor to ceiling and reeked of cat urine. 3 feet into the mess of boxes, the man found the bones, Sean said. Sean said a couple of boxes fell on top of the bones, obscuring it. He wonders if the police ever searched the garage. He added that none of Terry's belongings had been touched after he went through a trailer on the property. All of her clothing was exactly where it was, he said. Everything that she had on the bed was still on the bed. He still slept on half a bed that he hadn't cleaned for 7 years. Her picture was there. Everything was there. I just know if my dad would have known she was there, it would have killed him before the cancer did, Sean said. I don't know. Let me ask you, they brought in dogs, but you're going to tell me these dogs are not going to find? Because even though there was other smells, you would think also that nobody visited this man for the 7 years afterwards when he died in February. Or a body smells pretty bad. I don't know. It does seem like somebody the dropped the ball on this. Sounds like there was a lot of mental illness, some hoarding. But question is, did she just die? Did she do something to herself, or did somebody do something to her? Interesting, huh? All right. Next story out of Daily Mail. Arctic radar station worker met horrific fate after ignoring warning signs to go outside and photograph polar bears. Oh, here we go. Another person with a poor sense of self-preservation. Here we go. An amateur photographer was mauled to death by 2 polar bears after ignoring warning signs to get a better shot of the creatures. This happened in Canada. Christopher Best died after he left the safety of an Arctic radar site where he had only worked for 2 days on August 8th last year. The 34-year-old from Labrador walked past a large polar bear warning sign and appeared to have kept a safe distance, but did not realize that the second animal was lurking nearby. Best had photographed them earlier and asked a wildlife monitor at the site on Brevoort Island to inform him when the animals were in the area so he could take more. He uploaded pictures of a hulking beast the day before he was viciously torn apart. It's unknown if it was one of the same polar bears that killed him the next day. Chris said, "Well, yeah, they're not close to us," his mother, Shelley Cox, said he told his stepfather on a call moments before he died. "God, Daddy said, I know the difference, right?" At the end of his shift, the wildlife monitor told Best that a bear was outskied, according to a report by his employer, the Nassituk Corporation. After exiting the doors, Best went around the side of the building and believed he had enough space between himself and the bear. Surveillance video shows that the second animal cut off Best's way to a nearby building and charged him, according to the report. The first bear then attacked the worker as well. An employee saw them mauling and yelled for a gun. However, when nothing was available, he ran to the wildlife monitor. The staff member fired a non-lethal bear banger from a 12-gauge shotgun, causing both bears to take off, but one of them turned back. The gunman was forced to fatally shoot it. As Best's body was loaded into a truck, another armed employee arrived to keep watch. Best had some training in polar bear awareness, but some documents to complete the course were missing, according to the report. Cox told CTV that she believed the accident could have been avoided if further safety measures had been taken at the site, such as installing fences and motion sensor monitors with alarms. The report proposed improvements to their safety policies, which included a public address system as well as announcements being made when bears were known to be outside. In addition, it requires any worker going outside after hours to obtain permission from a manager or supervisor. Another measure proposed was to fence off certain areas of the site. Nassituk had sent Best to do logistics works on Brevoort Island, but he was waiting for security clearance and was working as a fuel tank cleaner in the meantime. No injuries or fatalities from bears have ever been recorded during the company's project of the previous company, the DEW line, over the past 7 decades, according to the report. Nasituke said that it was unable to comment since the government report was not yet finished. A spokesman said, "We care deeply for the safety and well-being of our employees and feel for everyone who continues to be affected by this tragic incident." Now, for you, those of you, you're going to see there's a video here of a man running because they've got a polar bear charging him, and he gets on that sled and takes off. And you know what? Besides having a poor people think that these animals are like Disney animals. They're wild. They're predators. They're apex predators. And it's like, stop being touchy-feely with these animals. It's like, respect them. I don't understand that. Anyway, another story from the Daily Mail. Yellowstone National Park has 50-mile zone of death where all crime is legal, as experts reveal why loophole has never been closed. An iconic American park is hiding a 50-mile area where all crime is legal, an expert claims. It's been 2 decades since Professor Brian Colt uncovered the zone of death at Yellowstone National Park. The Michigan State University College of Law professor published research in 2005 in a paper called The Perfect Crime. He theorized that all crime in the 50 square mile section of Yellowstone that sits in Idaho can't be prosecuted. Yellowstone stretches across nearly 4,000 square miles in Wyoming, with small portions of the park located in Montana and eastern Idaho. When Congress designated the park's borders in 1872, Yellowstone became one of the few federal parks that fall exclusively under the federal government's jurisdiction, meaning that states are powerless to prosecute crimes. According to the Sixth Amendment, alleged criminals are entitled to a trial by jury, comprised of residents who live in the district where the crime was committed. However, the 50 square mile section of Yellowstone in Idaho is desolate land where no humans live. Therefore, any trial for a crime committed in the zone of death would violate the defendant's Sixth Amendment rights. When Colt initially published his research, he noted that the findings weren't meant to inspire crime, but to raise awareness among lawmakers about a potential legal loophole, one that has yet to be closed. It's incredible. Crime is bad, after all, but so is violating the Constitution. If the loophole described in this essay does exist, it should be closed, not ignored, Galt argued. Yellowstone was the world's first national park, so there was no precedent for setting up the legal framework to prosecute crimes that occurred within it. In what Galt called a constitutionally fateful decision, Congress designated the entire park to fall under the Federal District of Wyoming, making it the only federal court that includes parts of other states. Some have argued that if a crime were to be committed in the zone of death, the court could request a change of venue to fill a jury. However, Colt noted that under the Sixth Amendment, only the defendant can request to change the trial's location. It's unlikely that a defendant would request to change the venue if there was a possibility the case could be thrown out. Since Colt published his research, the zone of death had been widely covered and even inspired a book about a fictionalized killing spree, and was the premise of an episode of the hit television series Yellowstone. Colt said in 2023 that his paper went as viral as a law journal article can go. The professor added that when the fictionalized book titled Free Fall by C.J. Box was released, lawmakers finally attempted to close a legal loophole. In a follow-up paper, Colt revealed that before he published the work, he wrote to the Department of Justice and the U.S. Attorney to preempt them. The U.S. Attorney responded that they didn't have the power to amend the law, and the Department of Justice ignored the message. The only person who responded to Colt at the time was a summer intern for the House Committee's Majority Counsel. Finally, in 2022, a representative from Idaho, Colin Nash, sponsored a House resolution to close the legal loophole. The resolution called on Congress to put the zone of death region under the District of Idaho instead of Wyoming to avoid constitutional hurdles with the Sixth Amendment. The resolution passed, but Congress never moved forward on voting to make the bill into law. Colt told newspapers this week that he doesn't believe legal action will ever be solidified unless a serious crime motivates lawmakers to prioritize closing the loophole. There has been no movement on the issue, even with the Idaho's legislature resolution, he added. Colt said he doesn't see anything changing until the defendant uses the loophole to get away with the crime. The legislature not doing anything? That's incredible. Oh, I refuse to believe that. Not. So here we go. A lot of interesting stuff happening out there. I'm telling you, it's weird, weird, weird. But I'll be back soon because, like I said, it's weird, weird, weird. Till next time, take care.